Russian President Vladimir Putin with Chinese leader Xi Jinping at a meeting in Tianjin on Friday. Credit, Alexei Druzinin/TASS. As Donald Trump, the US president, meets Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader, for one of the most unconventional and unpredictable summits in recent history. Regional powers China, Japan and Russia will be watching warily from the sidelines. The three nations, keen to guard their own interests on the Korean peninsula, have good reason to be anxious. Mr. Trump's unpredictable diplomatic style in the run-up to summit, which he spontaneously agreed to, cancelled, and then reinstated, has blindsided even Washington's allies. While some people might say it's a really interesting negotiating behavior that works to his advantage, I think it's really unnerved many of our allies, said Philip Yun, executive director of the Plowshares Fund, public foundation focused on nuclear weapons policy and conflict resolution. Here's Abe, who is spending a lot of time cozying up and trying to be good buddies with Donald Trump, and then Trump decides on the spot to have a summit but doesn't even tell Abe before it's announced, said Mr. Yun of Japanese leader Shinzo Abe. Abe loses face that way after spending so much time. Japan has been disappointed to have been somewhat sidelined as the US and North and South Korea push towards a deal for the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Shinzo Abe, Japan's prime minister, meets with President Trump ahead of the Singapore summit. Credit, China News Service/Getty Images. Tokyo remains a lone voice in the region, continuing to call for applying maximum pressure on Pyongyang to comply with international demands over its nuclear arsenal and on human rights. Mr. Abe, and the Japanese people, do not trust the North Korean regime to stick to its promises because of its track record of decades of reneging on agreements. Japan is nervous of any hint of a walkback on demands for the complete, verifiable, and irreversible abolition of North Korea's nuclear weapons, and is anxious to include the destruction of short and medium-range missiles that threaten Japanese territory in any future deal. Tokyo also wants Pyongyang to destroy its large stockpiles of chemical and biological agents, which the North denies possessing. I imagine Mr. Abe would have been ecstatic when it looked as if the Singapore summit had been pulled off, because he fears Mr. Trump is ready to make an agreement that leaves Japan vulnerable, said Jeff Kingston, director of Asian Studies at the Tokyo campus of Temple University. Mr. Abe does not want North Korea to enjoy a soft landing, he said. Mr. Abe wants regime change. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is focused on another uniquely Japanese concern: the state-sponsored abduction of its citizens in the 1970s and 80s to train North Korean spies. Mr. Abe has campaigned for their release for 20 years. Activists said as many as 100 disappeared, but officially Tokyo states 17 were kidnapped. Pyongyang admits to only 13, releasing 5 in 2002 and claiming the others had died. Human rights does not feature highly on regional power China's radar, but it does not want East Asia's future to be shaped without its own interests at heart. That was the motivation behind President Xi Jinping's desire to meet with Kim Jong-un on 2 occasions in recent months. After being briefed by Mr. Xi, Kim will go into the summit knowing that he has a level of support from Beijing in his efforts to reduce sanctions. But he will also knows that Chinese support will depend upon him gaining concessions which benefit not only Pyongyang, but also Beijing. Beijing's involvement in the summit, by proxy, is seen as inevitable and essential by Chinese observers, given North Korea and China's historical and geographical ties. Kim Jong-un and Chinese President Xi Jinping have met twice in recent months. Credit, KCNA via KNS/AFP. There is absolutely no way China and South Korea can be shut outside the talks between North Korea and America, said Wang Dong, associate professor of the School of International Studies, Peking University. They are neighbors of North Korea, and whether North Korea can develop in a peaceful and stable manner is in their fundamental interests. Many analysts believe, however, that Beijing's fundamental interest is ensuring that North Korea is not seduced by the US. Beijing is angry with Pyongyang over the nuclear tests which were carried out across the border, but Mr. Xi does not want the regime to move closer to Washington. Elsewhere, China will be hoping for limits on military hardware on its border, both in the north, but particularly in South Korea, where the US has significant weapons, and about 28,500 troops. The removal of US firepower from Northeast Asia would give Beijing more room to project its power and cement its great power status. The Chinese are trying to get Kim Jong-un to push for the removal of US troops of some kind, said Plowshare's Philip Yun. I also believe that what North Korea wants is to get out from under the thumb of China, he said. There are a bunch of different games going on here where the North Koreans have been famous and quite adept at playing the big powers off of each other. They're going to see the best deal that they can get from everybody else and move forward. Korean date. And how did we get here? Russia, meanwhile, appears to be eyeing its own economic interests as it lurks in the background of the peace talks. If a peace deal is signed, Russia has much to gain through the extension of its Trans-Siberian Railway, linking North Korea to Europe. It will also finally be able to exploit energy infrastructure that has been hampered by regional instability. The Russians have traditionally played a negotiating role in and around the Korean peninsula, maintaining ties with all sides. But Moscow has also clashed with other actors, especially with the US over its attempts to water down punitive sanctions against Pyongyang. Russia could also act as a spoiler, said Mr. Yun. Russia is like the Phantom of the Opera. They come in and come out when they want, and they can really make things difficult to